Yeah, Sterling's a good dude.
He is a good dude. He was telling me about his story where he was like arrested for MDMA, but he experienced the enlightening properties of it and realized that it was really messed up that it was banned, and that's kind of what brought him into the field. It kind of reminded me of your story that you talked about in a way.
Yeah, it's funny, dude, because Sterling and I have spent a good amount of time together the last couple years, and we have a lot of common ground in like crypto, and our experiences and appreciation of psychedelics, and then also he promotes something very similar to what I call holistic anarchism, but what he refers to as relational anarchism.
Oh, I see. So is there a difference between those concepts?
Well, I actually wrote an essay based on what I found from Sterling's website and his essays. It's called The Intersection of Holistic and Relational Anarchism, where I kind of compare and contrast like what I mean by that and then what he has written about it. So I think they're definitely complementary for sure.
Interesting. Wow, it sounds like an awesome article. The whole holistic anarchy thing, a lot of my followers, they're interested in agorism and anarchy, but they don't really have I wouldn't say they don't have really clear and concise sources, but it's nice that we can kind of talk about these in kind of clear and coherent ways. Like we were talking about Bitcoin yesterday, kind of trying to make it to where it's easy to understand for people that aren't necessarily technologically literate. So I like to do the same thing with anarchy for people who aren't totally familiar with all of the specific jargon and all of the political concepts. But usually it's pretty easy to describe. So I guess I'd like to start with how did you actually get into activism?
So I got into activism in probably I'd say late 2009, 2010. As far as being active, going out there and looking to meet other, I guess you could say, other activist groups and communities, and I went and tried all these different activist groups for a year, and every group I got involved with, either there was infighting and they weren't doing much of anything, or they were talking about some good things, but they weren't really doing it in a way that I thought was effective. Or, they got some of the picture, but they didn't see the full scope. So that kind of led me to start my own activist community with about 4 or 5 friends, and that was in May 2010. It was called the Houston Freethinkers, and had been active up until, I'd say, early 2018. And it's kind of faded since then, but over the years, it involved a lot of different types of activism, from civil disobedience to, cop watching and, rallies, info jamming, passing out flyers, trying to just inform people, to man on the street interviews, to protests and marches and all that kind of thing, as well as community garden builds and skill shares. And we have 3 different versions of called the Freethinker House, where we had benefit shows with local bands and artists, and just generally making ourselves a part of the community and trying to make people care. The original kind of motto, I guess you could say, of the Freethinkers, I wanted to put this on a shirt back in the day, was going to be something like making it cool to give a shit since 2010, because that was kind of the goal of the trying to get people to just care, So yeah, that was 2010, but I've told the story before. I think that for me, as far as actually starting to look at the world with a deeper and more discerning eye, that took place started to take place 2005, 2006, after I was arrested. Like you said, Sterling has a story. I have a story of being arrested. I was addicted to crystal meth for about 10 months, and before that was just hopping around abusing different substances. I do think there's a difference between learning from them and just straight up abusing them. Psychedelics as well as cannabis, the good drugs as well as the bad ones.
Right.
And I definitely was not using them with any sort of respect or just admiration. I guess you could say it was more self-destructive. I'm having a shitty day, so I'm going to eat 10 of acid, or take a bunch of Xanax, or take ecstasy 5 times a week. Just all kinds of crazy things. And one of my future books is going to be about that whole story. It's called 10 Months, and it's going to kind of chronicle what I went through when I went to prison, and that's where I discovered meditation, started to look at my own past and my own family's history. I do believe in epigenetics and intergenerational trauma, and could see this clear line of drug abuse and alcoholism and depression and suicide that had been in my family, and that I kind of carried on as well in my teenage years into finding drugs and getting locked up. So it was really then when I started to question things. It wasn't, a couple of years later when I got out and I got off parole that I started to realize that I was, that I had a brain and I like to learn, start to look at the world and question it when it comes to politics. But prior to that, I started to kind of go inward, and I've had experiences with acid, with like selling and giving away just because I saw a tool. This is like while I was going in and out of, back and forth with prison, I really still realized that even though drugs can't offer you enlightenment, that some medicines can offer you lessons that could be valuable, even if lessons come in ways that maybe you don't want them to.
Yeah.
So I had all those experiences, and that first that got me questioning, and then I got into like physical kind of community organizing in 2010, and then a couple of years later, whenever the phrase "the conscious resistance" kind of appeared to me or was whispered to me, that basically means to me is the idea of bringing two worlds together. The idea that the understanding that the struggle for a more free and ethical world can't come from just confronting the physical institutions of power, and it also can't come from just meditating for 12 hours a day and living off, in the monastery, the ashram, trying to avoid Babylon. It has to be this kind of balance of these two worlds, and that's what I call the conscious resistance, and recently I've started to call holistic activism, holistic activism. But yeah, so that's been my sort of journey, I guess, from activism. But yeah, it started with getting locked up and then getting involved in the community, and then has taken on just different roles over the past 9-10 years now.
That's very interesting. It actually is super correlational too, like you said, to Sterling's story. So it's interesting how these mind-expanding substances can help lead us into a path that is more concise with reality. It's actually more true. But also I like what you said about psychedelics when it comes to not actually needing them for spiritual experience. And I kind of wanted to talk about that too, because a lot of people conflate psychedelics with spiritual experiences, but then they think that they need them to facilitate those experiences. And I think when you depend on a psychedelic to have a spiritual experience, then you might be doing something wrong, because it's important not to look externally for something else for it, but rather inward. But that isn't to say that psychedelics don't have great utility, and you can't use them to be able to open your mind, but depending on them, I think, would be the difference for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned sort of this intersection of, like, I guess, true healing and the path to enlightenment and psychedelics, because I definitely, the second time, so I got locked up until 2005, and I did like a full year, about 11 months, was out for about 5 months, and then got sent back for another 3.5 months. And in that time, I had gotten out and I had rediscovered my love for like psychedelics. I was not using any of these other drugs that I don't believe can offer real lessons or, growth, except for in maybe more painful ways. And I started to get back to reconnecting and really having some deep meditations with just myself, like tripping in the room by myself, like on a few hits of some good LSD, or just like connecting with a partner or a couple of friends and things like that. And when I got locked back up, I pretty much spent like the vast majority of my time reading and journaling, and journaling really helped me connect inward and get my thoughts out of my busy mind. And I started developing at the time what I was calling psychedelics, and it was just kind of like a combination of Timothy Leary's book, which is also allegedly based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead and different states of like passing between death and rebirth, the Bardo state, and they use that as like a way to guide people through trips. So I was taking what they had sort of written already and then combining it with what I was learning about Zazen, which is Zen sitting meditation, and trying to bridge these two worlds with some of the teachings of the Buddhas. But yeah, so I definitely had my time in that realm, but absolutely you're right that, I personally don't want to be dependent on anything, especially after having gone through that. Alcohol, Xanax, ecstasy, crystal, like just, both at different points physically and mentally addicted. It's like a real compulsion. And even when it comes to cannabis, I do appreciate cannabis, but honestly, in the past just month or so, I found myself smoking less and less cannabis. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because I like to just have those sort of breaks where I make sure I'm in control. I was on the road for about 4 or 5 weeks and didn't have opportunity like I would here at home, so that allowed my body to, I think, recenter and to not only that, but like the cannabinoids to break down for, you say, my tolerance to go down as well. But also just for my body to reset. And since then, it's been this just nice awareness of like, oh, cool, I'd like to maybe go hang out with somebody and smoke and enjoy some cannabis, but also not really feeling that urge to like have it on me or to just, it's just been really cool feeling of feeling like totally in control of myself again, where I think even with cannabis, we sometimes can be really casual and forget the powerful nature of it, and the fact that cannabis is a teacher as well as these other plants. And it is important. Like for me, whenever I definitely had times where I was taking ridiculous amounts of LSD every night. I would rent out these hotels and get some friends and basically say like, all right, we're just going to stay here all night and sell acid, and just anybody could come over. I would just be like dosing people and just, giving some away, selling some, and just while I was selling it, I'd just be taking some. So there would be several times where like for a week plus I'd be, just kind of what I call stair step and just like dosing myself every now and then. So it was this kind of constant state of tripping. And I really did have some deep, powerful experiences as well as some very scary ones. I felt like they were always offering a lesson, and I definitely had some trips prior to getting arrested where the spirit of that medicine was telling me to slow down and calm down, and I think it was sort of foreshadowing what was coming. And then I also got to the point where now I feel like the lesson that I was taught was, hey, you don't need me anymore. You never really did. It's like you do it so much that you're just like, wow, it's cool. Like I like to have a little supply of psychedelic medicine available to me whenever I feel like I might need that, or me or somebody close want to go out to the forest and camp out and just have an awesome night. But I find those nights happen less and less, and I can't even believe now, looking back, that I used to take so much. But I'm thankful for those experiences. But yeah, I think it's just you ultimately come to that realization that you don't need anything external to feel happy and complete. And then if you do find yourself that it's an area that could be studied or sort of tried to understood better, and see where that's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think psychedelics open the door, and then you maintain that relationship through your own personal spirituality, as long as you kind of do it in a healthy way. And cannabis, too, is something that falls under, it is addictive. Terence McKenna actually said it's good to smoke cannabis once a week to maintain its full entheogenic effects. He didn't take his own advice, of course. He smoked every day. But it's still good advice. At least he knew that it's probably better to smoke about once a week, Sometimes we know things so we don't follow the actual advice, but that's okay too. So I wanted to ask for everyone that's watching, what is the concept of agorism to you, for people who might not understand what it actually means? And then after talking about agorism, how does that intersect into spirituality? Because sometimes it can be hard to view the two paradigms from the same lens, but I think you can.
No, absolutely. So, I guess the first point I'll make is that, and this is really just, it's an insignificant point, but I've realized that depending on what your accent is, we each say it differently. But I have it on good word from some of Konkin's still living friends that he preferred it to be pronounced agorism, as in the agora. But most of us, I think, have come to pronounce it agorism. But yeah, the root of it is the Greek word for marketplace, which is the agora, and that kind of just opens up the door to what the concept is about, essentially about this vision that Samuel Konkin, who was an activist in the 60s and 70s, died in 2004, but he was really active in the 60s, along with a lot of other student groups, really tried to create this vision for those who identified as libertarian and anarchist and voluntarist and individualist, how they could move the ball forward away from state and state control and corporate control and towards a more free place. What he envisioned, what he called the agora, this decentralized marketplace where all people could be free to exchange goods and ideas, do business amongst each other without any sort of third-party interference, be that governments or corporations as we know them today, or just another private individual, and just individuals being able to live and act as they please, as long as they're not using aggression. And so he had that sort of as his basis, and then from that he also kind of created or discovered what he called counter-economics, and that was his strategy for getting to the agora. So the agora was kind of his envisioned futuristic world where there would be decentralization and no government and corporate control, and people would be able to thrive, and mutual voluntary exchange would be the rule of the day. But he also had a vision for how we would get there, and that's what he called counter-economics. And so what that essentially means is that in his view, you had the mainstream, or what is known as the white market, the white economy. This is anybody who's listening who has a job that you get a check and there's taxes being taken out of it, or there's a record of your pay and it's being reported and things of that sort. That's the white market, mainstream status economy. And then you have the black and gray market. And again, Samuel Konkin believed in the non-aggression principle, or living free of coercion, not initiating force and violence on people, which is why he didn't believe in government, because he saw government as force and violence itself. And so along with that, the term black and gray market mean, all non-violent, peaceful, non-coercive economic activity that the state either deems illegal, which would be the case of the black market, or the state frowns upon and would prefer you to have licenses or permission slips, things like that. So, for example, in the gray market, this is garage sales, this is yard sales, this is getting the neighbor, somebody finds on an app or on Craigslist to cut your lawn and you exchange cash, and there's no tax record that, there's no middleman coming between you two, not paying any fees or fines or filing any paperwork. That's the gray market, right? So technically not illegal, but the state would prefer you have their permission slips. Black market, then you get into, again, all peaceful, nonviolent economic activity that the state considers illegal. So this would be your friendly neighborhood cannabis dealer, or mushroom salesman, or somebody who deals with selling weapons, or all kinds of different things. It doesn't necessarily have to do with drugs, but just things that the state considers to be illegal. Again, as the list of things the state considers to be illegal grows, more and more people are already participating in this counter economy, either in the black and gray market, without even realizing it. So it does kind of sound like this, black market, some people think of mafia. Konkin actually had a term for illegal and violent activity, which was, not peaceful, and that's the red market. So black market, peaceful, non-violent, but illegal activity, red market, violent and illegal. And so he had this distinction of how to separate that, and the way he saw it is that individuals as entrepreneurs or collective entrepreneurs could come together, could take their money out of the status economy, move it towards the black and gray markets, and build what he called counter institutions where we could compete directly with the state. So as opposed to voting, trying to fix things by voting on somebody new, or violently overthrowing the government, you compete with them directly. And this is what I like, because as far as relating agorism to the spiritual path, I think it does take the middle path of what the Buddha talked about. The Buddha spent a lot of time living a lavish life and living like a prince, right, and had this material wealth, but then ultimately was unhappy. This is, the story that we're told anyways. And then, he went out and did the opposite. He starved himself. He went to go live among the poor and saw death and experienced all these things and realized, well, that's not enlightenment either. I'm just like getting emaciated and dying here, basically. And then he, came up with what he called the middle path, which was not seeking the extremes on either version. To me, this is the same thing with agorism. Agorism offers a third way, or a middle path, not violence and not, participation in the system, and also not apathy. Some people, after deciding, well, I can't vote them out, or I guess I can't violently overthrow them, I guess I'll just be apathetic and complacent. But agorism offers a different path, a path that is about action. And in the agorist philosophy, Konkin wrote the A3 phrase, which was agora, anarchy, and action. Agora for the marketplace, anarchy for the fact that he believed in self-ownership, non-aggression principle, and a stateless society, and action. That all this, like, to actually make agorism happen, it's not just, let's write books about philosophy and theorize all day. It's just about building and creating. And the beautiful thing is he actually predicted a lot of the technologies that we're seeing now. I mean, he died in 2004, before crypto, before social media as we know it, and all these things. But he was around for the beginnings of the internet, and he knew even back in the 70s, and he was writing about how computers were emerging at that time, and how we were going to see a further decentralization. And hopefully over time, as more people move towards decentralized entrepreneurship, and they recognize the value of taking their money and their energy and their support away from the state, and they redirect it to the counter economy, and we use this as an opportunity to create new systems, we can watch the state crumble under its own weight as we build this more decentralized world. That's the ideal version, at least. And so to me, it is a very holistic philosophy, because I know I've been ranting for a minute, so I'll pause in just a moment. When I talk of holistic activism, I really do try to, when I talk about it, I always define the terms, because I've recognized that holistic and anarchism are probably the most misused and misunderstood words that I've come across, and I've decided to combine the two of them together. But people think anarchy means chaos and violence, and then people think that, I've seen everything from holistic gardening, holistic sex, holistic cat food, holistic, whatever you think of, there's a holistic out there, and it's definitely a kind of a buzzword. But it does have a meaning, and it comes from the philosophy of holism. And holism is about studying whole pieces, whole systems, as opposed to the individual components. So if you're talking about any subject you're thinking of, when you study it holistically instead of individually, it fundamentally changes the way you understand it. When it comes to holistic psychology, they really try to understand the entire mind as opposed to trying to dissect it and look at it individually. Holistic medicine at its best is the idea of trying to find the root, not just treat the symptoms. So you're looking at the whole body, the whole picture. Mm-hmm. Then when I talk about holistic ecology is the study of the entire planet and all the ecosystems that are there, the humans, the animals, the plants, everything as one single entity as opposed to individually. And so it does change the way you look at something. So when I talk about holistic activism, I talk about an activism and an anarchism that is not reactive, and that as much as it points the fingers outwards at the state and all these different institutions, it also points the fingers back at the individuals and says, how are we contributing to these systems? And then asks an individual to do what I call a holistic self-assessment, to look at your economy, your relationships, your food, your, all the different areas of your life. You divide it up how you will, and see if the way your relationship to those different areas is in line with your principles. If it involves force and violence, if it involves participating and working with the state or corporations that you might not be about, and then to try to find ways to, start to align words, thoughts, and actions, which is also another sort of Buddhist way of thinking about things. The Buddha talked about your thoughts and your words and your actions. Your thoughts become your words become your behavior becomes your destiny. There's kind of a really well-known quote that is attributed to the Buddha about that. And so to me, that's what I'm thinking holistically is like, okay, in my mind, I say I'm an anarchist, or I say I don't want to support this destructive system, or I don't want to, leave a bunch of waste behind for the coming 7 generations, or what have you, whatever your issues may be. But then you look at, well, in my daily habits, I'm actually working against my goals. I have this plan for leaving the planet in a better place, or having a permaculture farm, or just having a beautiful community, or just making money in a way that is aligned with my beliefs. But then you look at your habits and you might be contradicting yourself. So it's just about recognizing that and then trying to think holistically and seeing how you can get your entire whole life, your whole picture in line with those values. So when taking that into account, I think agorism and counter-economics plays in perfectly, because once you realize that you don't support the state, or you don't support Monsanto, for example, or McDonald's, or whatever corporations that you don't like what they're doing, you choose not to give them your money anymore, their time and energy. It's the idea of voting with your dollar, right? So once you're doing that, you are now taking steps to not just complain about it on social media or to protest about it in the streets, but to actually remove your support and participation in that system, right? So that is helping you align thoughts, words, and actions. And the more that you do it, the more balance I think that you will find. Also, at the same time as focusing on our internal world and dealing with our own internal trauma. That's kind of the holistic picture for me. It's like, to me, when I'm thinking of holistic activism, it's something that's very, it's more compassionate to the self, and it's more observant of the world around us and less reactive. And when combined with the philosophy of agorism and counter-economics, I think it truly is, because then you're actually removing yourself from those systems. You're not just talking about it. And I found that even if people aren't familiar with the philosophy of agorism, have ever heard of Samuel Konkin, know what the heck counter-economics is, in some way they're usually participating. And also, even without knowing that history and those names, once they decide, wow, I hate what Monsanto is doing, I keep seeing that their products are causing cancer, they're being linked to this, they're doing this and that, you know what, I'm going to make sure I don't support any companies that are doing business with them. So I'm going to start checking the foods I'm buying, and my lawn care products and all this kind of different stuff, and making sure I'm not supporting that industry or those people because they don't align with my values. That is already an agorist counter-economic way of thinking. They don't even have to know the words to do it. It just makes sense. You're like, yeah, that's not in line with my beliefs. Let me opt out of that and support something better. So I think it's a very natural way of being. And it's just about flowing with it in a way that feels good to you. We're all going to have kind of a different focus, but I do think that if we start with the roots of our principles as the principle of self-ownership and everything that derives from that self-ownership and the idea that it's wrong to initiate force and violence against other free, powerful, beautiful people. And then for me, equally important, the 7th generation principle, thinking about the ways that your actions are going to affect not only the current generations, but the generations after them and after them, up to the 7 generations and beyond, that we will never meet and never know. And that agorism is a generational change. It's not a quick, easy fix. People want to believe that if we vote for some new candidate, whoever they're putting in front of you this time, Beto, I guess, that's the key to our destiny. Or all we have to do is just get enough guns and violently overthrow them, and they want this really quick fix, like this, let's just get it done. Like, all I have to do is press this button, or somebody has to come in and be an authoritarian leader or something like that. But the truth is that the change that I think most of us seek is a generational change. It's going to take a lot of difficult laborious effort on the part of every individual who truly desires this. At least that's what I believe. I don't think it's going to come and just be handed to us. And if we choose to be proactive now, we can lay the foundation for something maybe better and for those in the future.
I think you're definitely right about that, Derrick. Thanks for that really good description. I think that it is an evolution of consciousness that will arise, and it is from working on your inner world, because the external reflects the internal. So if you work on the internal well enough, the external world does reflect that. It reminds me of when you were talking about the tax guy. I was thinking about your milkman, or when you were talking about the black market. Your milkman, if they sell unpasteurized milk, is participating in the black market, and they might not even know it, because that's illegal because we can't handle our own milk. I had unpasteurized milk in Brazil. It was delicious. So a lot of people, when we're talking about these concepts, they say, well, what if they never work, or they're not applied, or there's no examples of them? But there are examples of them. There's examples in history. There's startup societies, and there's things like seasteading. So recently, there was a seastead that was in, I think it was near Thailand, and the people who were running the seastead, Thailand said that they were threatening their national sovereignty, and so they're threatened with execution from the state of Thailand, which is absolutely insane. So I think it shows that nation-states see that there is a fear, that they have a real fear of agorist principles, and they see it as a threat to their actual infrastructure, their sovereignty as they put it. So what do you think about seasteads and that whole recent thing with the state literally threatening to kill people over practicing in something that isn't even in their territorial waters? It's crazy.
I mean, it's insane, dude. They said that, I think if I remember, the seastead was 12 nautical miles out into international waters, so well off the coast of Thailand. And I mean, it's just another evidence for me that the state and these people who run the states, which are essentially just gangs, like, I mean, no matter what sort of benefits are derived from the existence of governments, at the end of the day, examples like this and plenty of others out there have shown us time and time again that the people who are either a part of the state or who endorse its actions, they do not believe in individual self-ownership and sovereignty. They have this more collectivist idea. I think that's a big part of the struggle sometimes, and I've written about this before, individualism versus collectivism and sort of the balance between those polarities. But I think what it comes down to is that the people behind the state and those who do endorse them believe that they control everything. I mean, they believe that they control the airspace a certain, distance up, and they obviously believe that they control space, and they control the sea as far as, even though they say, okay, this is international waters or whatever like that, obviously somebody's going to come claim it. And there are examples of places where, because you said that, like, for example, that there has been a history of whether or not they're identified as anarchists, different places that had a relative freedom in existence and were not harassed by the states, that they were self-organizing, they were decentralizing. And there are examples, with Zomia is one of the places that John Vibes and I have written about before. I'm trying to find, there's another one that the name escapes me right now, and it was called like Neutral Monisted or something like that. I can't remember where it was at, but it was in Europe for a period of time. Unfortunately, the state does what it does, and eventually they came and tried to declare that it was their own. It was basically this little piece of land that happened to be just in some kind of weird situation left a neutral piece of land where all the different states around it were fighting over at one point, and then they just backed off and said, like, all right, nobody's going to claim it. And then before you know it, people started coming from all around the world and built it into this little town that was, like, officially not a part of any state. It was just this tiny piece of land. I can't remember how big it was. But eventually, there ended up being a war where the state's like, no, there's too much economic activity. There's too much good happening here. We're going to have to clamp down. And so, this is, again, it's a good example that the state does own you. And we already have clear examples in the fact that they think they can tell you what you can put in your body. I mean, that's just a really basic one that we have accepted for so long already, the idea that we're supposedly free, but we can't decide whether or not we want to alter our mental state. I mean, you can, but they approve of, but when it comes to other areas, if they say, it's illegal, then you're not allowed to alter your state of mind. And that's to me, a pretty good example that the people in charge think that they own us to some degree, that they have, a say in what our bodies do and what our minds do.
Right. I've heard it termed the imprisonment of consciousness, which, if the state says that it literally owns your consciousness, it's saying that it owns you effectively completely. Like in Britain, there was a there was an example of a kid that had really bad health problems, and some other state agreed to do all the treatment for the kid, and then the state of Britain said, no, it'd be too bad for him, we don't want to send him there to potentially get saved, even though the parents wanted to. I mean, it was absolutely insane. So, thank you for being here, Derrick, and explaining these concepts. You explain it really coherently and concisely. You do a really good job at that. I hope to be able to get to the point to be able to describe it just as well. But to wrap up, why don't you tell us a little bit about the new book that you're writing and about the Conscious Resistance Network itself?
Cool. Yeah, so the book that I'm trying to finish, I was hoping to have it out already, but I've committed myself now to getting it out this month. I'm probably going to take a little bit of time off of making videos and content to focus on it, but it's called Counter-Economics: How to Opt Out of the Coming Social Credit Surveillance State. A little bit of a long title, but I'll break that down. As I was telling you earlier, it's based on the final, recently released, unfinished work of Samuel Konkin, who, as I mentioned, he was the guy who discovered agorism and counter-economics. He wrote New Libertarian Manifesto while he was alive, and that book is available online, and you can find it for free online. And then he also was writing the Agorist Primer, which was kind of an update and went even deeper, and that was published shortly after his death. Well, he is also working on another book that was called Counter-Economics. I can't remember the rest of the official title. It was like from the back alleys to the stars or something, because he had this really like epic vision, but it was never finished before he died. But recently one of his buddies found 6 or 7 finished chapters and then an outline of the whole book and then notes and different things. And so they put it in, edited it, got it nice in order and released it online, and you can find that. But there's no plans to put it into print. So I figured I wanted to find some way to put it into print, and also to not necessarily to finish his book, because he definitely seemed to have a pretty epic vision in mind, but to take some of the things that I've already done, because I've been so inspired by agorism and counter-economics, and I think I've definitely helped introduce a lot of people to it. Me and John Vibes have tried to update it. In our third book, Manifesto of the Free Humans, it focused on like taking it, what Konkin had already done, and updating it for like the digital crypto area and how it's, relevant now. I'm going to do that even further in this book. It's going to have a couple of essays that John and I wrote together that are be expanded, and then a few brand new essays from myself, and in the final part of the book will just be all of Konkin's original chapters. I'm trying to take some of the things that he wrote about and make them a little bit more accessible, I think, because sometimes his language can be a bit heady and like just difficult to get through for some people, I've noticed. But yeah, ultimately I want to just have it in print, and I'm also going to take into consideration, like the title says, the coming social credit surveillance state, which is a whole other topic, but I'm sure some of your listeners will be familiar with the fact that China has a social credit score, already the Sesame credit system, and the United States and other countries are more than likely going to adopt it as we move into this era of the Internet of Things, and so more and more surveillance and sensors and detectors everywhere. We're going to get to a point where companies, governments, they're going to use social credit as a way to socially engineer behavior. And I've started to think more and more, what does that look like for not only the agorists, the counter-economists, but for just people who want to be generally free? People who are, hey, like I'd like to opt, like what happens if tomorrow the government wakes up and says, having a chip in your hand is mandatory now for whatever reasons. Let's just imagine that, right? Maybe that's far off. Maybe it's something's potential.
I don't know.
I just put these questions to people to see if people have realistically thought about this, or even maybe more relevant, because it's kind of a hot button issue right now. If there was an announcement tomorrow that vaccines were mandatory or something like that, right? Wherever you stand on vaccines, either way, I think it's wrong to force that sort of thing on people.
Absolutely.
And if you haven't thought about this and don't have what I call freedom cells or your mutual aid group to come together and think of how does our community handle this if the state comes in to take one of our kids because they don't like our religion, or they don't like the way we educate them, or they don't like our health practices, or the IRS man tries to come take your buddy because he hasn't paid taxes in years, or whatever the situation may be. How do you handle those situations? And so I try to take those realistic situations into mind and writing strategies and ideas, and also taking into consideration that we're coming into an era where facial recognition cameras are going to be everywhere. It's going to be a lot more difficult in some ways to be in the counter economy as everything gets further and further tracked. But I do think there will always be, a black market for that. As we've seen, even in places like China and North Korea, there is still a black market for information where people and goods and ideas and supplies are funneled in a black market. So I'm going to write about what I call the counter-economic underground railroad, and the idea of, in the future, maybe potentially having to funnel goods and people in and out of some of these heavily controlled states that we're coming into, and what that looks like for an agorist and counter-economist. So it's going to be some big ideas, but yeah, I'm working on that. Hopefully we'll have it out by the end of May. And the Conscious Resistance Network is my website. I started in 2013. It's at theconsciousresistance.com. It's really meant to be an open source, community source kind of website for people to contribute content. Like, your interviews are always welcome to be posted. We've had mutual friends who've posted on there. I've had dozens of people come through, whether that means posting poetry or writing articles or blogs or doing videos or interviews, or just a mix of things. I pretty much allow all of it as long as it's in line with these ideas we've been discussing. I myself regularly make videos Monday through Friday, and then I write several articles a week, and that's all published on theconsciousresistance.com. And we've got a lot of different things going on there. But yeah, so that's the main place you can find my work, and you could also go to the website, and if you just type in agorism or counter-economics, you're going to see dozens of videos I've done and essays on those topics.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait for that new book to come out. I actually remember I read the third book that you wrote with John, The Manifesto of Free Humans. I read it in Brazil, actually, so I remember chilling on a hammock, this huge overlayer of this village, reading this awesome book. It was really great. But, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that new content. Anyone can find you on the Conscious Resistance Network. And so that's, anyone can contribute content to that platform. I didn't know it was, open source like that. That's really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody, if you're interested, let's talk afterwards and I'll get you set up. But anybody else who's interested, my email is intothelight@protonmail.com. And, yeah, that's the way I've tried to keep it. There was, when I was first putting the website out, I didn't want it to be derrickbroze.com and just focus on my work. I wanted it to be more, kind of open than that. And my vision for it has always been that we could have everything from healthy recipes to meditation and yoga videos to political analysis to conversations like this and interviews with interesting people and, just a whole range of things. So yeah, I'm open to more, content creators.
Awesome. Well, anyone who's watching that's the information that you can email him on Proton Mail, which is super good actually because it's encrypted. So anyone who's still on Gmail, you should get over to Proton Mail, which I also still need to do. So don't take it personally. If you're not on there yet, neither am I. So thanks again, Derrick, for being here. I think that's a good place to wrap it up, and let's have another conversation in the future.